Live on national TV, Trump's fury collides with Crockett's unshakable calm, and the world holds its breath. He brags about unmatched achievements, casting himself as America's savior. She tears it apart with brutal facts, proving his reign was one of the darkest declines in U.S. history. The clash doesn't just shake the room, it rattles the entire nation. Is this the moment Trump's empire collapsed? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The Phoenix Convention Center was packed to the rafters, every seat taken, every camera live. Thousands of eyes locked on the stage as the words, "Truth, Leadership, and the Future of Democracy" flashed across the giant screen. At the center sat Jasmine Crockett, the congresswoman and lawyer known for her razor-sharp tongue. She adjusted her microphone, her gaze cutting through the crowd. The air felt heavy charged, as if the nation itself was holding its breath. Everyone expected a steady evening, a calm exchange of ideas. But calm was about to shatter. The moderator touched his earpiece, his face drained of color. He stammered, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have breaking news. President Donald Trump has just called into the program." The hall exploded. Gasps clashed with loud jeers. A wave of boos collided with shrill laughter. Phones shot up, live streams fired, and the cameras zoomed in like predators. The tension was electric, almost violent. Jasmine stayed still, her eyes burning steady. Trump's voice erupted through the speakers, raw, unfiltered, cutting Jasmine mid-sentence. The debate had been hijacked live in front of the entire country. He wasted no time cutting straight into Jasmine's moment, like a storm tearing through glass. With a mocking laugh, he sneered, "Who is she to teach me about leadership? Who is she? Nobody even knew her name before she decided to sit here and act important." The words hung in the air, heavy and venomous, and the hall instantly buzzed with shock. Trump pressed on his tone, dripping arrogance. "When I was in charge, America had the greatest economy in history. Record low unemployment, stock markets breaking records every week, factories humming again, wages up like never before. People remember that. People were winning under me. I made it happen." He spoke as if every syllable was proof of his crown, his voice hammering down like a gavel. The crowd splintered. Some clapped wildly, others crossed their arms in disgust, muttering under their breath. He wasn't done. His voice rose higher, pushing through the static of the broadcast. "And let's not forget the border. Under me, it was the safest it has ever been. I built the wall, I sent troops, I stopped caravans cold. Illegal crossings dropped, everybody knows it. I made America safe." His words came sharp, confident, almost daring anyone to deny him. For a moment, the cheers from his loyalists echoed like thunder, bouncing across the room, but the other half of the hall shook their heads furiously. Then he slammed down another line, his voice vibrating through the speakers. "The military strongest in the world under me. I rebuilt it after years of weakness. Billions poured into defense jets. Ships, weapons, all because of me. Our soldiers respected me like no one else because they knew I delivered. No one messed with America when Trump was president." He rolled the syllables like trophies on a shelf, daring Jasmine to look small in his shadow. The tension spiked so high it felt like the air itself could snap. But then his tone shifted from boast to poison, slipping into personal attack. He chuckled darkly. "And this woman, this congresswoman, she thinks she can lecture me. Please. She's nothing but a performer, dressed up for the cameras, hoping someone will pay attention." He paused, then added with a sneer, "I hate to break it to you, sweetheart, but America doesn't want a lecture from someone like you. Stick to your lane." His words carried a cruel edge, weaponized mockery aimed at her gender. The crowd gasped, some shouting shame, while a pocket of Trump supporters howled with laughter. The division was electric, half the room, furious, half egging him on. Trump pressed the blade deeper. "And let's be honest, she's playing a card we've all seen before. You know what I mean. Every time she's challenged, she pulls the race card, plays the victim, tries to gild America. I built real results. She builds excuses." The venom landed like a slap, leaving the hall buzzing with outrage. Phones went up everywhere, live streams exploding online, capturing every raw second. People shouted over each other, some yelling, "Sit down," at the speakers, others chanting USA to drown the boos. The cameras zoomed in on Jasmine, her face steady, her eyes sharp, unshaken, despite the verbal barrage raining down. Trump's voice, though strong, was turning manic, each sentence louder, sharper, like a man trying to drown out the silence that followed every fact he claimed. The scene felt less like a debate and more like a courtroom under siege, one man pounding his chest while the nation watched in suspense. The moderator sat frozen, unable to intervene, as Trump's voice filled every corner of the arena. The chaos on the floor grew, shouts, groans, applause colliding in waves, yet the focus of every camera and every eye was on Jasmine. She had not spoken yet, but her silence was deafening. The tension was unbearable, and the nation waited to see if Jasmine would finally break her silence. Then she leaned into the microphone, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. Leadership is not measured by the size of a crowd. She began, her eyes never leaving the camera, but by the lives of everyday people. The room hushed instantly, the noise collapsing into silence. For the first time all evening, Trump's roar was muted by the sheer steadiness of her tone. She reached for a folder marked BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, and flipped it open for the audience to see. "Let's talk about jobs," she said evenly. "At the end of your term, unemployment hit 14.8%, the highest since the Great Depression. 20 million jobs were wiped out in just weeks. Entire industries collapsed: restaurants, airlines, manufacturing. COVID-19 was never contained, and workers paid the price." Gasps rippled through the hall. She pressed on, her voice gaining weight. "You promised the greatest economy. What America got was the steepest crash in modern history." She didn't stop there. Another sheet was lifted, this one showing healthcare numbers. By 2020, over 2.3 million Americans lost their health insurance, she declared. Families struggling in a pandemic were left without coverage. At the same time, subsidies were cut, Medicaid enrollment was restricted, and the Affordable Care Act was sabotaged. Inequality widened: the richest 1% gained trillions, while working families lost their savings. "You didn't protect them. You abandoned them." The words struck with precision, each fact a dagger tearing through Trump's boasts. The camera zoomed in closer, catching every flicker of her expression. Jasmine pointed to a final document, her voice low, but fierce. "And let's talk about democracy itself. Reports across this country recorded attempts to suppress the vote. Purges of voter rolls in Georgia, polling sites closed in Texas, endless lawsuits aimed at throwing out ballots, over 10,000 complaints filed about intimidation at the polls. You called it protecting elections. The truth is, it was an assault on the American right to vote." The audience shifted uneasily, the weight of her evidence pulling the hall into silence again. She closed the folder with a sharp snap that echoed across the hall. "And you call that success?" she demanded, her eyes burning now. "That is not greatness. That is a nation strangled by careless leadership." A murmur swept through the audience, shock, recognition, and a quiet wave of agreement. Some nodded firmly, their faces set in stone. Others simply stared at the stage, caught between disbelief and the sting of recognition. For the first time, Trump had been forced onto the defensive without a single raised voice. But the silence didn't last. Trump's voice burst back into the hall, louder and angrier than before. "Those numbers are fake, all of it." He barked, his words dripping fury. He slammed his rebuttal into the microphone, trying to shake the ground Jasmine had just secured. Yet his outrage only underscored the contrast: one voice calm, precise, built on data, and the other raging, desperate, already losing control. He pivoted from denying data to mocking the messenger, and the temperature in the hall rose like a blowtorch under steel. Trump's voice came back louder, rougher, riding the echo of his own outrage. "She has never run a business. She has never won a nationwide election. I am the one who understands the American people." He stretched each word, savoring them like verdicts, trying to make the room feel small around Jasmine's silence. The cameras hunted for her face and found only stillness. He leaned into the insult, pacing his sentences like punches. "You want leadership? Look at what I built. Towers, hotels, brand success you can touch." He stabbed at the air no one could see, then sneered. "She reads papers. I make payrolls." The line drew barks of approval from a cluster near the back. Others folded their arms tight, bracing for the next swing. He changed gears and bragged about the street heat, rolling out the numbers as if they were armored trucks. "My rallies had tens of thousands, packed airports, arenas, overflowing lines that stretched for miles. People waited all day just to hear me speak. They came because they knew I was fighting for them." He let the memory of chance fill the space where logic should have stood. For a beat, the room trembled between nostalgia and nerves. He piled it higher using crowd size like a sledgehammer. I didn't need teleprompters. I didn't need the fake media to tell my story. I had the people, real people, truckers, cops, moms, workers. That's America. He slapped the word like a seal of ownership. The word hit, bounced, and fractured the hall into jagged pieces. Then came the smile that always preceded a cut. This congresswoman, he said, drawing it out. She's a television doll polished by studios, inflated by headlines, sold by the same elites who wrecked your towns. He shrugged, casual cruelty dripping off each syllable. Turn off the cameras and she disappears. The attack landed like a thrown glass. The crowd blew apart. A wedge of supporters stood and roared, USA, USA, so hard the air shook. Another wedge booed and whistled, the sound sharp as broken metal, trying to gouge holes in his parade. Phones shot up like a forest of antennas, thousands of little eyes streaming the chaos out to the world. The moderator looked trapped between a gavel he didn't have and a storm he couldn't name. Trump basked in the noise he had summoned, rolling his shoulders as if wearing the crowd like a cape. You cheer because you know, he shouted. You know I speak for you, not for the bloggers and the think tanks and the little talkers on TV. He jabbed the word little aimed like a dart at Jasmine. I filled parking lots with hope. She fills folders with excuses. The line drew a mean laugh from the loyalists. He doubled down, turning swagger into a rhythm. Tens of thousands in Ohio, tens of thousands in Florida, tens of thousands in Pennsylvania. We broke attendance records over and over. He ticked off the claims like a drumbeat, hoping repetition would calcify into truth. That's what leadership looks like. He roared, not charts, not lectures, crowds. He let the last word hang, daring the silence to disagree. The other half of the hall did disagree loudly. Boos rolled forward like a black tide, crashing into the USA chants and folding into one another until the sound had no edges. Someone yelled, sit down, and someone else yelled, let her speak. Security shifted along the aisles, hands at their belts, eyes scanning the fractures. The floor vibrated under a battle fought with lungs. Trump smelled the adrenaline and poured more fire. You don't win a country with binders, he barked. You win it with guts and grit and crowds that don't quit. He paused, then flicked the blade again. She's been propped up by cameras her whole career. Take them away and she's gone. The words were simple, cruel, and meant to bruise. He let them sit like ice on the table. Through it all, Jasmine did not move. Her hands stayed folded, her shoulders square, her gaze steady enough to cut through fog. She did not flinch when the cheers spiked, did not blink. When the boos answered, did not bite on any hook dangled in front of her. She watched the storm burn itself brighter the way a firefighter studies the wind before opening a door. She waited patient as a fuse. The cracked bell din still rattled the rafters when Jasmine finally moved. She slid a thick binder across the desk, and the cameras caught its spine, world reports. She spoke with steady clarity, her words cutting through the heat like cold air. We've looked inside the house, she said. Now let's see how the world measured us. She opened to a tab marked IMF and held up a chart. In 2020, the IMF shows U.S. GDP contracting by negative 3.4% for the year, with an annualized plunge of 31% in the second quarter, the sharpest quarterly collapse recorded among G7 economies. The room tightened, the crowd instinctively, leaning toward the numbers they could finally see. She didn't blink. That isn't the greatest economy in history. That is a free fall, she said, tapping the line where the graph dropped like an elevator cable. Factories cut shifts, small businesses shuttered, and paychecks vanished while the virus outran the plan. Pages turned, colored tabs flicked by like signals. A leader doesn't measure success by microphone volume, but by resilience when the floor gives way. She let the chart rest, the nosedive etched into the air. A new tab, WHO. Jasmine's voice stayed calm while the numbers did the shouting. By year's end 2020, the United States registered more than 350,000 COVID-19 deaths, the highest absolute toll in the world, she said. Hospitals rationed protective gear, testing lagged, guidance shifted, and the federal response arrived late. Nurses reused masks, families waited outside emergency room doors, refrigerated trucks stood in for morgues. She closed the page with a soft thud. That is not what handled beautifully looks like. That is a country caught flat-footed while the clock ran out. She flipped to Freedom House, the paper crisp under the lights. Democracy is not theater, it's maintenance, she said. Freedom House recorded the United States freedom score sliding into the low 80s out of 100 in this period, explicitly citing weakening institutions and democratic backsliding and flagging the U.S. among democracies in decline. Her finger tracked the margin notes voting access fights, purges of voter rolls, aggressive gerrymanders, and attempts to overturn certified results. When watchdogs say your guardrails are bending, you don't rev the engine, you hit the brakes. The quiet that followed felt heavier than any boo. One more tab, Pew Research. Allies watch who we are not, who we say we are, Jasmine said, lifting a page of bar charts that looked like fallen fences. Confidence in the U.S. president dropped to about 19% in the United Kingdom, about 11% in France, about 10% in Germany. Favorable views of the United States plunged to record or near-record lows across key European partners. She let the figure sit. When your closest friends don't trust your word, your strength is a costume, not armor. Jasmine closed the binder and faced the lens dead on. When the world sees America as a nation lost at the wheel that cannot be called greatness, the line landed like a gavel. For a heartbeat, the hall was vacuum sealed. No cough, no shuffle, only the tense hum of broadcast gear. Then the seal burst, a wall of applause crashed forward, people rising in waves, hands, and voices colliding into a single roar. Trump's reply tore through the speakers, raw and furious. Fake, they are jealous of me. The chant and the fury hung in the same air, but the numbers were still on the screen, and they did not blink. The applause from the last volley of numbers had not fully died when Trump snapped back into the mic, voice ragged with fury. I was in the White House, and you never will be, he shouted, each word hurled like a brick. The line echoed against the rafters and rattled through the camera rigs. A pocket of supporters whooped and pumped their fists as if the past could drown out the present. Others hissed and booed, the sound cutting like sheet metal. The moderator's eyes flicked from monitor to stage, helpless to stop the collision. Jasmine didn't flinch. She let the noise pass over her like a wave hitting stone. Then she smiled, cool, controlled, unhurried. The White House is an address. Leadership is a commitment. And that commitment is the one you betrayed, she said, every syllable steady enough to stand on. The room's temperature changed. The jeers thinned. The cameras leaned in. For a beat, the stage lights felt brighter, as if the building itself wanted a closer look. Trump's jaw tightened and his breath hitched against the microphone. She reached for a folder labeled GAO and opened it flat so the nearest cameras could read the header. Here's the government's own watchdog, she said, tapping the page. It warned that the federal fiscal path was unsustainable while debt ballooned. By late 2020, total federal debt had climbed past $27 trillion, and debt held by the public pushed above the size of the entire economy. She slid a second page forward. Interest costs were set to squeeze everything else. Social Security checks, highway repairs, veterans, clinics, because when you borrow like there is no tomorrow, tomorrow sends the bill. A murmur rolled through the seats as people followed the simple math to its hard end. She kept moving, voice, even facts sharp. GAO also flagged the surge in improper payments, billions of dollars that went out the door without proper checks. That is not discipline. That is drift. She pressed a finger to a bolded line. Deficits exploded year after year, long before any plan to steady the ship. You called that winning. The books called it a warning. A man in the third row lowered his phone and just listened, mouth half open. In the risers, a woman nodded once and folded her arms as if the numbers finally matched the ache she'd carried home. Jasmine flipped to the next section, and the heading changed: Department of Defense Financial Management and Acquisitions. GAO kept the Pentagon on its high-risk list, she said. Year after year, the department failed its full financial audit. They could not cleanly track what they owned, what they spent, or where key parts were. That is your strongest military ever, a giant that cannot count its own limbs. She lifted another page. And look here, the F-35 fighter program. Projected lifetime costs around $1.7 trillion with sustainment. So expensive, commanders warned they could not afford to fly what they had. Spare parts shortages, Software delays. Jets grounded waiting for fixes. This is not sharp stewardship. This is waste wearing a uniform. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. GAO told Congress that weapon systems were routinely delivered late and over budget, that basic controls were broken, and that the audit repeated the same weaknesses year after year, she said. A leader fixes the leak. A showman paints the bucket. The line drew a low ripple of agreement, the kind that starts in the gut before it reaches the throat. On the edge of the stage, a cameraman mouthed the words to himself as if testing their balance. For a heartbeat, the hall held its breath, then it detonated. People surged to their feet in waves, hands slamming together, voices rolling forward like thunder across a plain. The ovation wasn't neat, it was raw, relieved, almost angry at how long the truth had waited to be said. A veteran in the aisle saluted once, then clapped until his palms went red. The red tally lights on the cameras seemed to flare as the sound climbed another rung. Trump's face flushed the color of warning lights. He leaned into the microphone and barked over the roar, words tumbling into each other. Lies, fake, totally fake numbers, he shouted, spit catching the rim of the mic. I rebuilt the military. I made America rich. She's making it up. The cadence that once felt like certainty now broke into stutters and spikes, a man trying to shout down the ledger. He pounded the lectern with an open hand and sent a hollow thud through the speakers that made even some of his fans wince. The thud of his fist still echoed when Trump straightened, chest heaving, and tried to summon one last surge. He gripped the microphone with both hands, his voice cracking but defiant. I won. I had the crowds. I was the voice of the American people, he bellowed, repeating it again and again, as if sheer volume could replace proof. His face glistened under the lights, red with rage and sweat veins sharp against his neck. Supporters in the back tried to revive their chant, USA, USA, but it came out thin, scattered, drowned by the tension hanging over the hall. Every camera zoomed in, waiting for the answer they knew was coming. Jasmine stepped forward at last, closing the space between her and the storm. She set her hand lightly on the lectern, leaned toward the microphone, and spoke in a voice that was low, steady, and unshakable. If you have to keep repeating that you are winning, she said, pausing, so the silence could carry the weight, then it means you are losing where it matters most, trust and truth. The words fell like steel, measured and final. There was no shouting, no flourish, only the calm of someone who knew the ground would hold. Even the air seemed to pause, the hall suspended in absolute stillness. For a long second, nothing moved. Trump froze, mouth open, his comeback stuck somewhere between his throat and the roar he couldn't find. The crowd sat motionless, as if their collective breath had been ripped away. The silence was not empty. It was charged, humming like the split second before lightning splits the sky. Every lens captured it. Every microphone drank in the absence of noise. Millions watching at home leaned closer to their screens, sensing the pivot before it broke. Then it happened. The first clap cracked the stillness like a gunshot. Another followed, then 100 more, until the hall detonated into applause that shook the rafters. People shot to their feet, chairs rattling, fists pounding, voices rising in a storm of approval. The ovation wasn't polite, it was primal, a release of tension built through every blow and counterblow. It thundered across the stage, drowning out everything else, a wall of sound that made the cameras vibrate. Trump's figure shrank under the wave, his lips moving, but lost beneath the roar. The eruption spread beyond the hall in seconds. Clips hit social media before the echoes even faded from the ceiling. A shaky phone video from the balcony was uploaded with the caption, "This is how you end a bully truth over noise." Within minutes, it was retweeted thousands of times, hashtags like Trust and Truth and Crockett versus Trump climbing to the top of trending lists. Screens across the country lit up with the same 10-second clip, Trump shouting, Jasmine standing firm, the line that sliced through the chaos, replayed on loop. Crowds in living rooms, bars, and break rooms gasped, then cheered as if they too were in the hall. On TikTok, split-screen reactions showed teenagers screaming with joy, veterans nodding gravely, and workers in uniforms wiping their eyes as they mouthed her words back. On Facebook, grandfathers posted the line in all caps, calling it the best answer I've heard in 30 years. Even skeptical commentators replayed the moment live, admitting the impact was undeniable. Inside the hall, the noise still shook the floorboards. People who had argued all night were suddenly united in applause, strangers hugging some with tears streaking their faces. The sound rolled like thunder through a valley, unstoppable, all-consuming. Jasmine remained at the lectern, calm as ever, her hands resting lightly, as if she had expected this all along. Trump's mouth moved again, his words muffled and empty against the tidal wave of approval crashing over him. It was not just applause, it was judgment. The crowd had heard the shouting, the insults, the boasts, and then they had heard the truth. And in that instant, they knew which one would last. The cameras caught it, the world shared it, and the moment carved itself into history with the force of a strike no one could ignore. By the time the ovation thinned, the story had already jumped to the control rooms. Networks recut the last exchange with tight zooms and stark freeze frames, building a newscast like a thriller. Anchors lowered their voices and rode the replay, letting the silence before the clap stretch like a tripwire. Producers stacked guests 2 by 2 and promised answers at the top of the hour. Across the crawl, red banners flashed, breaking labels, while the clip ran again and again. The night no longer belonged to the hall, it belonged to the airwaves. Through prime time and past midnight, the sets never cooled. One conservative host smirked, then rolled the footage anyway, because his audience demanded the moment. A progressive anchor called the line surgical and let it stand without commentary. A centrist panel shut their mouths for 10 full seconds and let the quiet speak. Every studio found a different angle, but none could avoid the same 10 seconds. The control room clocks kept spinning while the debate replayed in a loop. By 2 in the morning, call-in lines were jammed and ratings tickers flashed record overnights. Former aides traded barbs from remote boxes, while a pollster traced an instant reaction dial swinging hard on the last line. A late-night host replayed the silence and called it the loudest sound of the week. One network stacked the clip with archive bites and titled the package "Truth versus Noise" in bright white letters. Another cut all narration and looped the look on Trump's face as the room stood. Sports graphics crept onto political screens as if victory could be diagrammed. Former prosecutors broke down cadence and timing like coaches with game film. A retired general said the stillness before the applause felt like a unit taking final aim. Body language analysts mapped micro movements and named them discipline under fire. A media critic admitted a hard truth: no monologue could beat one right sentence. The score, they agreed, was written in poise, not volume. Online, the meme machine fired at full burn. Designers posted a split image. Trump red-faced mid-shout, Jasmine steady with a binder, held like a shield. Underneath it, bold type read volume versus evidence, and the graphic rocketed across timelines. Another version stripped words and wrote a single label under each half, noise and truth. Audio editors remixed the clip so that the breath between words thumped like a drum. Within an hour, the contrast was the internet's common language. TikTok duets stacked into grids of reactions that moved like a tide. Nurses in night shift scrubs mouthed the sentence during 5 minutes of borrowed calm. Factory workers in reflective vests played the clip on break and tapped the screen once in approval. Baristas poured hearts in latte foam with the line floating above the cup. College debaters traced the pause and called it the hinge where control flipped. Hashtags climbed fast. Truth over noise trust and truth in one line. Instagram reels turned the moment into posters you could feel with your eyes. Some creators burned the quote in block letters, others set it small so viewers leaned closer. Comment sections filled with plain talk. Needed this all day, no yelling required. The algorithm followed the attention and pushed the clip to anyone who lingered. Even people who swore off politics watched the replay to the end. Their faces change the way faces change when a twist lands. Overseas, the morning editions made the echo global. In London, Paris, and Berlin, front pages carried a banner that read, "America, Truth Defeats Noise." Broadcasters in Tokyo and Seoul ran the video with crisp narration and quiet respect. In São Paulo and Mexico City, callers told radio hosts they recognized the look of real control. Foreign correspondents said allies heard steadiness where there had been storm. The headline crossed borders faster than the sun. In European talk shows, guests repeated the headline in English and said the words tasted better that way. A cartoonist drew a megaphone melting beside a small candle that would not go out. An editor joked gently that the most American export was now a 10-second lesson in composure. Embassy staff streamed the clip in break rooms and messaged home that the temperature felt cooler. Morning radio across continents played the audio and let the breath between words hit like a snare. Back home, classrooms opened to a different kind of first period. Civics teachers wrote truth versus noise on the whiteboard and rolled the clip without a speech. Students counted the words and marked the beat that split the room. One teacher asked, "What is the difference between loud and strong?" and let the silence answer. A senior raised a hand and said, "One needs a microphone, the other needs a spine." The bell rang, but the lesson stayed. Barbershops picked up where homerooms left off clippers, buzzing under slow, steady talk. A phone leaned against the mirror, played the clip while the shop fell quiet. An older man in a team jacket said, "Rewind that breath." Listen to the whole room lean forward. The barber, eyes on the fade, said, "That is the handoff right there." From the back came, "Run it again," and the line landed like a hammer. Outside, the street hummed with the same rhythm. Cafes and diners added coffee and steam to the chorus. A waitress wiped a ring off the counter and said, "I like the part where he runs out of gas." Two delivery drivers mouthed the closing words in sync over toast and eggs. A mother bounced a toddler and whispered, "Listen before tapping replay one more time." A pair of retirees in ball caps nodded together without saying why. The TV above the grill rolled the 10 seconds again, and the room breathed with it. Receipts printed as the replay rolled again. Someone whispered the line and smiled into the cup. Forks paused as the silence landed. A busser stopped to watch and forgot the tray. The room exhaled as the screen reset. By sunrise, the echo of that 10-second clip had spilled off the screens and into the marble hallways of power. The Capitol woke to phones, buzzing inboxes stacked, and staffers playing the moment on repeat as they hurried between offices. When the first committees convened, the air felt like the hour before a storm tight and charged, everyone speaking a little softer than usual. In cloakrooms and corridors, members nodded to each other with the look people wear when they know they have seen something that will be remembered. A veteran reporter whispered, "This one sticks," and even the guards smiled like they knew exactly what he meant. On the Democratic side, the reaction was not fireworks but gravity. Committee chairs called staff in early and asked for binders labeled Oversight, Budget, and Defense Waste, as if the quotation itself had cleared a procedural path. She made the case without raising a voice. One whip said, tapping the screen where Jasmine held her documents like a shield. Another senior member told the press gaggle, "Calm is not a strategy you try. It is a strength you carry," and the line ran on the crawl all morning. A progressive freshman murmured almost to herself, "Now we move the work." The caucus did not cheer, it gathered its tools. Across the aisle, something unusual cracked through the usual armor. A centrist Republican from a suburban district stopped at the reporters' mics and said very carefully, "Facts matter and the country deserves composure." A retiring senator told a producer off camera, "She had the goods." You can hear it in the way the room went still. In the House basement, a conservative staffer texted a friend, "We need to fix the spending file before she does it for us," and then put his phone away as if it might testify. Not everyone bent, and many blasted talking points like artillery, but a few eyes showed the admission no statement could hide. They had seen a punch that landed without blood. Floor talk shifted inside a day, and the shift sounded like doors unlocking. The Oversight Committee asked GAO for a priority briefing on improper payments and delayed weapons programs, the request moving like a bolt through dry wood. A bipartisan letter began to circulate on defense audit failures, each signature arriving with a reluctant little shrug that still counted. Budget aides drew up hearing schedules that matched the beats of Jasmine's binder page for page, as if the country had already agreed on the chapter titles. "We owe people receipts," a gray-haired chairman said, and the words fell heavy enough to dent the table. Even the press gallery felt the room lean toward follow-through. Beyond the dome, the youngest Americans claimed the moment with a speed that felt like a gust. Student groups played the clip in cafeterias and lecture halls not to argue, but to show a technique they wanted to practice. Banner of Truth, one campus paper headlined, and soon hand-drawn posters with the phrase hung over club boards and dorm doors. High school debate teams wrote drills that practiced the pause and the plain sentence after it, a small ritual of discipline they could learn in a week. "This is how you land it," a captain told his team, and they nodded like they had discovered a new muscle. The clip became a study guide for nerves. On community college quads, the line turned into chalk on concrete, bright and blocky, and photographed 100 times. Student governments passed resolutions about respectful debate that quoted the sentence without commentary as if it belonged to common sense now. Theater majors and engineering majors traded the same takeaway in different words you do not need to shout if you can prove. A volunteer table for local elections used the clip as a screensaver, and signups rose like a graph you wanted to show your parents. She kept it simple. A first year said scribbling her email, and simple felt like power. In a world wired for noise, quiet won the day. If the young carried the banner, the working class carried the weight behind it. On loading docks and in break rooms, people watched the replay with elbows on knees and coffee cooling in their hands. A forklift driver in steel-toe boots said she talked like my foreman when the numbers don't lie, and everyone around him nodded. A union steward pointed at the binder and said, "That's a paycheck inside that book," meaning that someone had finally put the waste and the debt in the same frame as rent and groceries. A nurse on a double shift texted her sister. She stood up for the ones who do not get a microphone and then went back to triage. The applause from the hall kept rolling like a freight train in their heads. In small towns and big cities, the feeling was the same even when the accents changed. A barber in Cleveland said, "I have heard talkers." She sounded like a bill that gets paid, and his shop fell quiet in agreement. A long-haul trucker in Amarillo replayed the sentence at a truck stop counter and told the cook, "Trust and truth, that's the road before tipping too much." An auto tech in Macon wiped grease off his palm and said, "Somebody finally called the bucket what it is, and it was not a plan," and laughter cracked the tension like a good socket wrench. A teacher in Milwaukee took a breath and whispered, "My kids can learn this," and for a second the classroom in her mind filled with calm. In place after place, representation felt like oxygen. The press corps, always eager to sort a moment into history, reached for the old yardsticks. Nixon-Kennedy, 1960, one headline read, and the comparison was more than a cliche. It was a map of how cameras choose calm over heat. A veteran anchor explained that television has rules of physics as real as gravity, that sweat and volume lose to poise and proof under harsh lights. Historians reminded viewers that a debate can pivot on posture as much as paragraphs, and here posture carried evidence like a spear. "The lens is merciless," a documentary filmmaker said, "and mercy is not what you want when you are hiding." Editors underline the lesson: when the medium demands composure, the audience reads character. Then the commentary reached for a second marker carved years earlier in the bones of a crowd. MLK, 1963. Another column began careful to say the stakes and scale were different, but the craft of a sentence mattered in both. The writer pointed to the way a single line can collect a country's confusion and hand it back as clarity. A civil rights historian added that cadence and moral plainness can do more than fill a square. They can reset a compass. "Power hears itself in its own echo," she said, and the answer is a voice that does not echo back. The press did not equate. It traced a thread of technique. Editorial boards across the spectrum tried to get ahead of the public mood without tripping over it. One wrote, "The standard is not volume, the standard is verification," and urged lawmakers to show their receipts from now on. Another cautioned against hero worship, and then admitted the country needed examples of discipline it could feel and copy. Sunday panels replayed the moment, and for once let the clip breathe, without talking over it, a small mercy that felt like respect. A conservative outlet called the line a masterclass in controlled dissent, and their audience did not revolt. Somewhere between spin and surrender, an honest appraisal took root. Abroad, the clip arrived at breakfast and tasted like something their diplomats could use. In Brussels, policy hands said, "This is the note we have been waiting to hear," and slid the video into a briefing packet before a meeting on military spending. In Berlin, a public broadcaster ran the silence before the clap without voiceover, trusting viewers to read a face. In London, an evening show played the sentence 3 times and invited former ambassadors to talk about reliability as a national asset. "Steady as a posture, markets understand," one analyst said, drawing a straight line from tone to trust. That line matched what watchers hoped to see. In Tokyo and Seoul, the reaction sounded like a sigh of relief from rooms that rarely sigh. Security experts said allies listen for tempo as much as promises, and the tempo they heard this time was not a drum solo, but a metronome. A headline in a major daily read, A Steadier Washington, with the question mark shrinking by the hour as the clip continued to circulate. In Ottawa and Canberra, officials privately used the word predictable in a positive sentence for the first time in a long time. You do not rally coalitions with decibels, a Canadian pundit said on air. You rally them with credibility. The sentence crossed time zones like a courier with a sealed letter. Even in places less friendly to Washington, the tone landed with a surprising lack of scorn. A columnist in a skeptical capital wrote, "Noise is easy. Discipline is hard," and gave the moment grudging respect. A state TV panel tried to laugh it off and then replayed it twice, unable to deny the clean hit. Business pages noted that risk models prefer smoother graphs to jagged ones, and this clip looked like the beginning of a smooth line. In think tanks and chancelleries, the phrase partial restoration replaced steady erosion, which felt like progress in plain clothes. No one called it a cure, but many called it a start. Back in Washington, the ripple became a habit. Committee calendars filled with hearings that looked like they belonged to the binder, not to the spin room. Members from both parties said, "Put the charts on the table," and meant it at least for a week that mattered. Young staffers quoted the line in emails and then cut the adjectives from their drafts, proud of the clean edges they left behind. A Senate aide told a colleague, "We should talk like this more." And the colleague wrote, "We should listen like this more." And both of them smiled. For once, the Capitol's mood matched the country's mood, tired of noise, hungry for proof. The effect on the ground did not require a parade to prove it was real. A machinist in Toledo said, "I didn't agree with her before, but I believed her after," and his crew chief slapped the hood of a sedan and said, "Belief is where work starts." A teacher in Phoenix printed the sentence on the board and told her students, "You can use this in an argument at home without starting a fire." A paramedic in Miami watched the clip at dawn and texted his team, "This is the pace we need on calls." A grocery manager in Omaha posted the meme in the break room and said, "It reminds me to keep the receipts." Each small adoption felt like a vote that did not need a ballot. None of it erased old rifts or solved old problems, and the country did not wake as a chorus. But a corridor felt straighter, a voice felt steadier, and the next question felt closer to the point. In Congress, Democrats and a few Republicans said the quiet part out loud. The argument had turned because the evidence walked in on 2 feet. Among the young, a phrase replaced a shrug, and a pause replaced a shout. Among workers, someone at the microphone finally sounded like someone who knew what a bill looks like when it comes due. And overseas, the picture of America regained a shade of trust that had been missing, not a flood, but a current you could feel if you stood still long enough. The roar of applause still rumbled through the rafters when Jasmine steadied herself at the lectern. The hall was alive with noise, yet in that storm she held the calm. She waited for the crowd to breathe, for the shouts to soften into something that could carry her words. The cameras zoomed tight, lights blazed hotter, and every network cut to her face because they knew the moment was not finished. She leaned toward the microphone, her voice low, but commanding, a voice that made people lean in. This was not the rebuttal, this was the summation. She began with the first principle, her words crisp enough to slice the air. "Truth is the foundation," she said. "No one can break it." The phrase carried like steel striking steel. People in the front rows mouthed the words back like students repeating a lesson they wanted to remember. In the upper decks, a wave of nods spread as though the meaning had landed in each chest. The broadcasters underlined the line on their chyron as if it was already history. She did not raise her tone. She did not need to. The truth she named had already proven its weight. Jasmine let the applause flare, then quiet, then flare again before she lifted her hand to ask for stillness. She pivoted to her second point, her voice steadier than the lights. "Calm is the highest form of strength." She paused, allowing the words to land like a verdict. Anyone can shout. Anyone can rage. But it takes strength to stand, to wait, to speak with control when the storm screams around you. The cameras captured faces in the audience, some stunned, some smiling, all listening with the focus of a jury in deliberation. The statement was not theory. They had just lived it with her. She pressed forward, her delivery measured but fierce, as if she was stitching the air itself into a contract. "Leadership is not a chair," she declared. "It is responsibility." The hall erupted, then hushed, then erupted again. You can sit in an office. You can hold a title. But that does not make you a leader. A leader carries the people, carries the duty, carries the burden to put others first. The words shook the chamber harder than any chant. Members of Congress in the front row leaned toward one another, murmuring, knowing she had just reframed the definition on live television. For the millions at home, the line felt like a mirror they could hold to every politician in sight. The three messages now hung in the air like pillars holding up the ceiling. Truth, calm, responsibility. They weren't slogans. They were verdicts. They were not carved on stone, but they felt heavier than stone. They cut across party lines, across geography, across age. You could be a student, a worker, a parent, or a retiree, and the words would still land. You could be in a factory or a boardroom, a classroom, or a patrol car, and they would still fit. The pillars were built in real time in front of a nation starved for something solid to stand on. And then Jasmine leaned in closer than before, her eyes narrowing, as if she was speaking not to the crowd, but to each individual watching at home. The hall stilled itself again, as though it knew a final blow was coming. When chaos screams, she said, each word dropping with weight, truth only has to stand still, and it will win. The silence that followed was not silence at all. It was the crackling charge before thunder. Then the room detonated. People stood so fast that chairs clattered backward. The applause was a physical wave crashing and rolling, drowning out even the sound of her microphone. The networks froze the moment frame by frame because they knew they had caught lightning. For a heartbeat, even Trump was quiet. His red face glared from the monitor, his lips pressed into a thin line, but the sound from the hall left no space for reply. Jasmine lowered her gaze, allowed the ovation to pour over her, but never broke her calm. Her hands rested on the binder. Her shoulders squared, her voice silent now, because the words had done their work. The chant started in one corner. Truth, 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 and it spread until the whole hall pulsed with it. It was no longer her voice alone, it was the crowd's. The broadcast didn't fade when the speech ended. It multiplied. Commentators leaned back in their chairs, whispering like they were afraid to interrupt what viewers had just felt. One said this was not rhetoric. This was instruction. Another added it was a closing argument, and the jury is the nation. Every clip replayed the three sentences, then the final blow, then the explosion of applause. Social media flooded with captions, foundation, strength, responsibility. People began writing the words on posters, memes, and profile pictures within minutes. The phrase about chaos and truth trended across platforms in bold black text. Outside the hall, the lesson traveled into daily life. A mother texted the line to her son before he walked into a schoolyard fight, hoping he would carry calm instead of anger. A nurse scribbled it on a whiteboard in the break room after a 12-hour shift, telling her team to remember why they showed up. A coach pinned it to the locker room door and said, "You don't beat chaos with chaos. You beat it by holding your ground." A grocery store clerk printed it and taped it by the register, grinning as customers pointed and nodded. The message was no longer about politics. It was about how to stand in the storms everyone faces. In offices, workers quoted it during heated meetings, cooling tempers before arguments spiraled. At dinner tables, parents used it to explain to children why patience mattered more than shouting. On factory floors, supervisors told their teams, "This is how you argue with management, calm with receipts, not rage." In classrooms, teachers wrote the words on the board, asking students what it meant to them. The answers came fast. It means don't lie. It means don't panic. It means lead, don't pose. What had begun as a battle line in a hall had become a compass for ordinary life. The phrase echoed in church pulpits, barbershops, and corner cafes. Preachers said, when chaos screams, let the truth stand still, because truth belongs to God. Barbers told customers, this is how you deal with someone. Running their mouth, don't match the noise, hold the line. Cafe owners scrawled it on chalkboards above the specials, turning a cup of coffee into a daily reminder. Even in courtrooms, defense attorneys cited it as they asked jurors to wait for evidence. The line had traveled from the arena of politics into the bloodstream of everyday culture. Journalists noticed the spread and wrote about it with awe. It has the rhythm of a proverb, one column said. It feels ancient, though it was spoken minutes ago. Another wrote, We've seen leaders shout boast insult, but rarely distill the national ache into one sentence. Editorials urged readers to remember it the next time they scrolled headlines, the next time they fought with family, the next time fear tried to drown reason. The press compared it to the simplest lines that had outlived the men who spoke them. This one historian predicted on live TV is going to last. In the days that followed, what mattered was not only that Jasmine had spoken, but that people carried her words into their own voices. They repeated them at rallies and union halls and PTA meetings and counseling sessions. Each time the line took on new flesh, adapted to new storms, but carried the same steel. The message that began in a clash of politics had grown into something larger, something durable. It had crossed the boundary between an event and a principle. Inside the chamber, Jasmine closed the binder, gathered her papers, and stepped back from the lectern. The ovations still thundered, but her face stayed composed as if she already knew the work had only begun. The three messages, truth, calm, responsibility, now belonged to everyone who had heard them, and the closing sentence, sharpened into a weapon of clarity, had cut through noise like a blade through fog. It was not only a victory in that hall, it was a manual for how to survive chaos anywhere. The ovation still thundered like a storm trapped under the roof when Jasmine lifted her hand, and the room quieted as if a switch had been thrown. She took one measured breath, then turned her body from the crowd to the lens, the red tally light staring back like a single unblinking eye. The microphones caught the hush, the cameras leaned in, and the control rooms held their edits. She was no longer speaking to a hall. She was speaking to living rooms and break rooms and midnight kitchens across the country. The air felt tight, charged, waiting for a line that could carry past the walls. Her voice came low and steady, the exact pitch of resolve. If you believe in this value, share it to remind each other that truth never trembles. She did not blink or smile or chase an echo. She simply let the words stand. The sentence moved outward like a flare in a dark field, easy to see and impossible to mistake. For a heartbeat, the hall did not react, as if the audience understood that the line wasn't for applause. It was a task. She kept her eyes on the lens and let the instruction become a bridge. The crew in the trucks watched their meters and mouthed the sentence to themselves, already clipping the 10 seconds for every feed. In homes where the TV still murmured past bedtime, people reached for phones without looking away from the screen. The directive was simple, plain language, simple, the kind you could text without needing context. It didn't lecture or scold or point a finger. It handed out a job everyone could do. Jasmine held that silence like a musician holding a rest, then filled it with purpose. She spoke to the night shift nurse with grooves in her hands and to the bus driver who started before sunrise. She spoke to the parent who taught patience at a kitchen table and to the foreman who counted every overtime hour. She spoke to the teacher who kept a classroom steady when the world outside tilted. The cadence was not a shout. It was a steady drum you could march to. She did not ask for worship. She asked for witness. Share it with a friend who loves to argue and a friend who hates it, she seemed to say. Share it with someone who talks too loud and someone who thinks they have nothing to say. Share it with the neighbor who waves from the porch and the coworker who lives in his headphones. Not because a clip is trending, but because a sentence can carry like a tool passed hand to hand. The job wasn't to win, it was to hold a line. The cameras found faces going still the way metal goes still when it cools to strength. People in the lower rows tilted their phones to capture her exactly head-on. No angle. No filter, the way you photograph a document you need to keep. The control room director split the feed into 4 boxes, Jasmine crowd close-up banner, and in every box the sentence felt the same. A caption operator typed the words in clean block letters, no exclamation points, just steady text. An engineer nodded once at nothing, as if the signal itself had found its footing. The room's tremor became a pulse. The hallway outside caught the echo and sent it down the stairwells. Volunteers with lanyards repeated the line to each other like a call and response, surprised at how right it felt in the mouth. A security guard leaned into his radio and said, "They're going to share that line," and the reply came back, "Copy." The sentence landed because it didn't tell people what to believe. It told them how to carry what they already knew. In a place where slogans come loud and leave fast, this one sat down and refused to move. It felt less like a pitch and more like a pact. She stayed with the lens and added weight by not adding words. The networks cut seamlessly from the hall to viewers' faces on split screen, watching eyes, water jaws set, and hands lift to screen glow. The algorithm began to tug at the clip, but the clip didn't need tugging. It moved because people moved it. You could hear keys tapping in apartments and garages and dispatch bays. You could feel the stutter of screenshots and the soft percussion of share buttons all hitting at once. The country wasn't cheering anymore. It was working. The ask was not complicated, and that was exactly why it was dangerous to lies. Share it to the group chat where arguments die in sarcasm, and share it to the family thread where silence turns into grudges. Share it with the uncle who posts too much and the cousin who never posts at all. Share it in the comment section where rage tries to bait you, and in the quiet inbox where someone is waiting for permission to care. The path was obvious. The line could travel anywhere a hand could press send. In the first balcony, a veteran stood with his phone raised, and the words reflected in his eyes. In the second, a student shot the clip, typed nothing, and let the sentence be the whole message. In the third, a woman put her hand on her chest like she was taking an oath, and then pressed the share icon twice. On the main floor, an older couple looked at each other and nodded without speaking, each already deciding who should get it first. The applause that had been a wave became a current, quiet and strong. Action replaced echo. It was not a rallying cry that burned hot and gone. It was a torch that passed without flames licking at the hand. The sentence didn't promise victory. It promised a posture. It didn't ask people to pick a side. It asked them to hold a standard. It didn't narrow. It widened because anyone anywhere could share a line without screaming. In a season of noise, the task felt clean. The test was simple: share it and let the truth stand still. Jasmine finally broke eye contact with the lens to scan the crowd, and the crowd gave the look back, the look of people who understand a job and accept it. Not a mission with a deadline and a badge, but a habit built one small act at a time. 1,000 tiny signals all pointing in the same direction. A chain that doesn't snap because every link understands the pull. The sentence did not belong to her anymore. It belonged to them. She didn't stack promises on top of the ask or weigh it down with fear. She let the one instruction breathe in the open air. If you believe in this value, share it to remind each other that truth never trembles. No freighted adjectives, no heroic costumes, no drums. The power of the line was that it fit in a whisper and a shout, a thumb and a heart, a home and a street. The choice was not whether to be loud. The choice was whether to be clear. In studios far away, anchors repeated the sentence once and then stopped, resisting the television urge to gild it. Commentators who live by more words than most people will ever say in a year decided not to add any. A Chiron writer removed the extra line she had typed and left the quote by itself. An editor in a glass box looked up at his wall of screens and felt something pass through the building like a front of steady weather. The quiet had turned into clarity, and clarity was doing its own work. Across the country, people wore the ask like a small badge no one else could see. A delivery driver pulled to the curb and sent the clip to a friend who always spirals typing nothing. A librarian scheduled it on the branch page between story time and hours of operation. A firefighter played the audio in the station kitchen, set his phone down, and went back to washing a pan. A night clerk pushed the clip to a private group where the rules are no politics and decided this wasn't politics at all. The sentence slipped through doors most arguments cannot. Jasmine did not linger on the stage to soak in what she had started. That was never the point. She let the crowd's sound crest and fall without chasing it. The binder at her fingertips still felt warm from the lights, and the pages were no less sharp than they had been. But the sharpness had leapt from paper to people, and that was the only leap that mattered. The task line would cover more ground than any speech could. Even those who didn't like her or didn't trust her could understand the form of the ask. It did not demand allegiance. It requested a relay. It did not sharpen a wedge. It extended a hand. It did not require explanation. It asked for repetition. And because the sentence was about something bigger than a person, it could travel past the person. The truth, as she had framed it, did not need a defender with a raised voice. It needed carriers. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.